chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. Now, I'm going to go through it verse by verse, a step at a time, rather than reading it all in the beginning. We're just going to go through it a step at a time, and I'm going to have it thrown up here on the screen so we can all see it. But if you want to see the whole big picture, I definitely encourage you to take out your Bible that you may have brought, or the Bibles that are in front of you there in the seats, and take those out. John is the fourth book in what we call the New Testament, the second part of the second chunk of the Bible. It's about 3/4 of the way, a bit more than 3/4 of the way through your Bible. You can find it in the table of contents if you need to look for it there. And while you're flipping there, I want to tell you a little story. I have a brother-in-law who, in turn, my brother-in-law has a brother whose name is Brian. Now, Kelly's laughing because she knows now what story I'm going to tell. So my brother-in-law and he's got two brothers, and one of them is named Brian, and their mother happens to think that Brian, her son, is a pretty big deal. Okay? Pretty big deal. So when it comes time to prepare for Christmas, and everybody getting together for Christmas or any given holiday, really, the obsession in my brother-in-law's mom's mind is, where is Brian? Is Brian going to be here? Is Brian going to make it? When is Brian and his family going to come in? Are they coming in on time? And my poor brother-in-law and his other brother seem pretty unimportant to their mother. And so my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law were driving along, and they were driving by one of many churches that in this time of year has a sign out front, like our sign out front, that has a message on it that says, Jesus is the reason for the season. And my brother-in-law said, nope, Brian is the reason for the season. Okay? Brian, and now, maybe some of you can relate to this. I hope I'm not raising any sensitive things in your families, okay? Maybe one of your siblings is the reason for the season in your house. I'm not sure. But all joking aside about the reason for the season, we human beings are constantly looking for the reason that things are the way they are. We're constantly looking for the reason of why things are the way they are. You know how often people say everything happens for a reason? Maybe you've said that yourself. Maybe lots of people have said that to you. Everything happens for a reason. There's something instinctive in us that believes or wants to believe that there's some explanation. There's some reason for why things are the way they are. I mean, we can wonder about the reason that nature is the way it is. I happen to be experiencing this in a really enjoyable way right now through one of my kids. My third child, Arwen, is at an age, and she also has a particular way her mind works, that she is really into science right now. And when I take her to gymnastics once a week, usually the conversation in the car is I say, Arwen, what's new in the world of science? And lately the answer is nothing, because we're in social studies. But before that, it was, what's new in the world of science? And she'd be telling me stuff about science, and she asked me questions. We were driving yesterday to Ohio and back in one day to visit some members of Kelly's family, and she was asking questions on the way. Wants to know, why are things the way they are? Why does the world work the way that the world works? Why is there more light in the summertime? Why are the days longer in the summertime than they are in the winter? And we're getting this whole explanation about that. People have been wondering those things for thousands of years. And it can go from simple things, why is this the way it is, why is that the way it is, to much broader and much deeper questions as to why is there anything at all? Why should there be anything rather than nothing? Why, if there is going to be something, why should there be matter? Why should there be stuff that you can touch rather than just energy? Or why should there be any energy, anything that's moving or motion? Or how did this all get started? Why is the universe here? Why is it orderly? Why is it that when I drop something, it falls to the ground every time, and it's not like sometimes nature just says, nah, we're not going to do it this way, and we're going to reverse everything, and it's going to go up? Why is the world predictable? Why is it orderly? Why is there life? Why is our planet where it is? Why is it the way it is when we compare it to all the other planets in the universe, or all the other ones that we know of? And these kinds of questions of why is it the way it is? Why are things the way they are? People have been thinking about for a really long time. What's the reason? And scientists have done so much over the course of centuries to distill reasons and things that seem to be the reasons. Well, it's the reason because we have this physical law and that physical law and this physical law over there, and you put all those laws of physics together, and this is the way it is. And then there are still holes, there are still gaps, things that don't quite line up, and scientists are still working on that, and I do believe that they'll come up with answers. But there's still sort of a question behind the question, which is, okay, so we have natural laws, but why should we even have natural laws? Why should things be predictable? Why should things be orderly? And that leads into another question of, why are people the way they are? Because people are part of the universe too. Human beings are part of the universe too. So why are human beings the way we are? Why do we do what we do? Why do we think what we think? Why do we act the way they act? Or even, I understand why I am the way I am, but why is she the way she is? What's the reason? Why did he do that? Why did she say that? What were they thinking? What's the reason for it? There must be some explanation for this. And then that leads into yet another question. Why is life the way it is? Why did this happen to me when I was a child? Why did I lose my job? Why won't this person talk to me anymore? Why am I so lonely? Why can't I get the answers? Why is it that whenever I get close to somebody, they reject me? They betray me? Why is it that I can never seem to make it? Why is it that other people are more successful than I am? Why is it that other people are noticed and I'm not? Why am I sick? Why is my loved one sick? These kinds of questions, why is it the way it is? We're constantly grasping, striving, trying to find a reason, thinking and hoping that if we find that reason, it's going to make sense and it's going to give us some comfort in the reality that we're living in. What is the reason? Why is my life like this? Well, there are lots of important parts of the Bible that talk about the reason that things are the way they are, and the reason that things happen the way they happen. And one of them is this passage in John 1 through 18. This is the fourth of the four Gospels, which are biographies of the life of Jesus that appear in the Bible. And this is a passage of the Bible that some of you may be very familiar with. And I want to help you read it tonight, especially if you are familiar with it, as if you are one of the first people ever to read it. Because the first people who were ever to read this were in some ways very much like us. They had loves, they had hopes, they had desires, they had pains, they had fears, they had struggles, they had temptations, just like you and I do. Things haven't really changed all that much through the centuries. But in other ways, they're very different from you and me. They were living in a different place. They were living in a different time. They spoke a different language. They wore different clothing. They had different ideas. And this was written by John to connect with people in their ideas. There were people who read this the first time who were Greeks. Or even if they weren't ethnically Greek, they spoke Greek and they knew Greek thought. And they knew Greek literature in the Roman Empire of the first century A.D. And some of them followed various philosophies, various thoughts, various ways of looking at the world. There were people, for example, who were called the Stoics, that philosophers who had a particular outlook on the world. There were others who followed the philosopher Plato, called Platonists. There was a particular way that they looked at the world. There were other people living in the first century who would have read this the first time, who were Jewish. And these Jews, who are ancestors of Jews who live among us here today, these Jews, some of them had themselves read deeply in Greek philosophy, and they saw parallels between the Greek way of looking at the world and what was revealed in their Bible, which is 3/4 of our Bible, what we call the Old Testament. One of these guys was a guy named Philo who lived in Alexandria in Egypt. And he tried to find ways that in fact what was taught by Plato and what was taught by Aristotle and what was taught by Zeno, that all of these things were actually originally taught to Moses by God, and they were there in the Old Testament kind of under the surface, and if you could just crack the code, you could find it all. And there were still other Jews who were more traditional worshipers of God, and some of them who knew a guy who became known, even though he lived in Palestine, became known among Jews throughout the Roman world, whose name was also John. Not the same John who wrote this book, but a different John. And this guy was somebody who showed up and he said, repent, change your ways, because the kingdom of heaven, the government of God is almost here. Believe it. Get right with God. Wash yourselves. Be baptized. Be changed. make a new start and a fresh start because God is coming and he's going to change things. So there are people like this all throughout the Roman Empire who would have read this for the first time, and I want to read it through with you as John is writing about the reason for everything, the reason that the world is the way it is, the reason that people are the way they are, the reason that your life is the way it is, through the eyes of the first people who would have read it. John starts out by saying, in the beginning was the Word. And that word, the Greek word underlying that, because John was writing in Greek, can be translated in many ways, and one of those ways is the reason. And for some of these philosophers, that's the way they looked at it. In the beginning was the reason. They believed, yes, there is a reason that things are the way they are. It's not just we're imagining things, but there really is a reason for existence. There really is a reason that things are orderly, that things are beautiful, that things work, that the seasons go the way they go, that people act the way they act. There is a reason. And John says, yes, in the beginning was the Word, was the reason for all of this. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. And I put the word it after he because in the original language at this point, and for most of what we're going to read here, you can't actually tell whether he or it is meant. So they probably would have thought it was it all the way along until things start to change later on. But he says, he was with God in the beginning. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And for some of these readers who would have read it, they would have gotten what he was saying. They would have realized that it's sort of like with you, your own reason and your own thinking. You know, as a human being, you have intelligence, which is part of you. It's something that you have, but it's also sort of something that you are. You know, when you communicate, when you talk to people, they're hearing your intelligence. They're hearing how your mind works, and that is you. And they thought that God was like that God, who is perfect and simple and beautiful, that he spoke a word. He had an intelligence and a reason that was the reason then that made this world what it is and the way it is. He was both, that reason, that speech of God was both God and yet with God at the same time from the very, very beginning. And the Jews who read this would have recognized immediately the very first words of the Bible, and you might know it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And how did he create the world? By speaking, by saying, let there be light, and there was light. He spoke it. When you and I speak, stuff may or may not happen. At least that's what my experience in my own household. I speak, and things may or may not happen because I say so, okay? But when God speaks, stuff happens. There's no question. When God says, let there be, it is. It is. And when God spoke, he made this world the orderly place, the beautiful place, the balanced place, with all of these perfectly attuned physical laws that coalesce in such a way as to make life, incredibly diverse, overflowing life on this planet possible. And that word, that speech, that intelligence of God, who's both God and with God, was there at the very beginning. And John says, through him, or it, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And again, everybody hearing this could get on board with that. They'd be like, yeah, totally, exactly. There's a rationality that's the reason that this is all here. And he goes on to say, in him was life. That this word, this reason for all things is the reason that there is life. That life is not just a random sort of thing, but is connected with the reason itself to bring life into existence. And many of the people who would have read this would have seen different gradations of life. You know, going from inanimate objects, some of them, especially the Stoics, believed that there was some sort of spirit that was the very thing that held inanimate objects together. So a rock was a rock and not just like a sort of soup of stuff kind of floating around, because there was spirit in it that held that rock together. And there's a bit more in it that holds together a tree that can grow, and a bit more in it that holds together an animal that moves and that crawls and that reproduces, and there's even more in it in a human being who thinks, who has a mind and who thinks, and all of that is life. And because of this reason that existed before the world, there is life in this world. And that life, John says, was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Plato described the existence of human beings as being like people in a cave who were chained to a cave and saw sort of shadow puppets being cast onto a wall. And if anybody could actually break out of that cave and walk out of it, they could see the sun shining in all of its glory. But most of us are stuck not really seeing what reality is. We live and we walk and we do our things in just sort of the shadow world of ordinary life, of doing the ordinary stuff that we do, feeding ourselves, clothing ourselves, working, resting, playing, talking, loving, just the ordinary stuff. But Plato said there's reality that's beyond this. That if you can just break out of it with your mind, you can connect with what's ultimate and what's real. And John is saying, yeah, that is real. There is a reason that if you can just go beyond, and it strikes you and it hits you, and if you just go beyond the ordinary, you can find what's really going on behind the whole world, before the whole world, and what's making sense of all of this. That light has shined into the darkness of this world, but the darkness has not overcome it or understood it. You can understand it either way. The darkness does not know what to make of it. The light shines. It's the reason we're all here, and yet we can't perceive it. We don't recognize it. We're not really sure what the answer is. And then John shifts gears, and he talks about that other John that I talked about before. He says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The Greeks who might have read this for the first time would say, oh, John, this is a philosopher I've not heard of. Who is this guy? But the Jews who would have read it would know who this John was. And they would totally agree with this. Of course, John is not God. He was just a man like us, but he came as a prophet sent by God to tell us the truth. And then the writer does something interesting. He says the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world. And though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. At one level, this is understandable. Of course, yes, there's a true light that's shining in the world, but then the reader would start to scratch their head and say, what do you mean that it was coming into the world? Like, there was a time that the light was not in the world, but now the light is in the world. This is a new idea. And that he was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not recognize him. Well, sure, yeah, lots of people are idiots. I get that. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Well, what was his own? Who are his own who would receive him or not? What was this about? And then he says, yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. Now this is very odd. It makes some sense and yet doesn't make sense. Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Okay, so you're telling me that there's a reason for everything that it is, and that if we just know that, then we'll be wise, we'll be enlightened, we'll understand the universe, that this is with God and yet is God in some way. Okay, I get this. This all makes sense. But the right to become a child of God, you mean, well, what does that mean? I mean, there would be some people who would say, what do you mean the right to become a child of God? I mean, we're all children of God already. Just because we exist, just because we live, just because we have minds that can think, we're children of God. Just because we're produced by him, we're created by him in this universe, we're children of God already. Why would anybody become a children of God when they already are a child of God? But then on the other hand, people would say, how in the world could you become a child of God? God is beyond us. God is simple. God is perfect. God is pure. God is spirit. God has no body. God is, it cannot be hurt, cannot be touched. How could anybody possibly be related to him in some way as to be a child? And yet here's this idea that people aren't children of God, but they can become one. And the way they become one is not by some sort of natural action, not just by human birth, but because God himself takes a human being and makes that human being one of his own children. And it happens to those who believe in his name. And this really doesn't make sense, because how in the world could the reason for all things have a name? I have a name, you have a name, we all have a name, but This is a principle. This is a concept. This is abstract. I mean, it's like saying that God has a name. How could there possibly be a name for this light, for this reason for everything? And then John, the writer, really ratchets it up and starts knocking the dominoes down. The Word, the reason, became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Okay, wait a second. This doesn't make sense. See, for the Stoics who would be looking at this, they would say the Word can't become flesh because it already is. The reason is already connected with everything on earth already. And the Platonists would be looking at this and saying, well, that doesn't make any sense because there's no possible way. Flesh is bad. Flesh is junk. Flesh is the thing we're trying to escape from. We're trying to be liberated from being in the flesh. We're trying for our souls to escape our bodies and go into eternity. Why in the world? How in the world? It's not even possible that the reason that's eternal, that's before the entire universe, could become like us in this junk, this stuff? Really? And he came from the Father full of grace and truth. He made his dwelling among us. Somehow this thing came and became part of us. And then John testified concerning him. He cried out saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.'" So for all those disciples of John all the way out there through the world, they would see this and realize that John was actually saying, I'm not the one you need to be listening to. My purpose is to say you need to listen to that one. Well, who is that one? What are we talking about here? Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Yeshua the Messiah, a human being, a man who is the promised one of God. And to the Jews who are reading this, they would see it means the promised one has come. The one that God told our ancestors is going to come and change this world, to make the wrong right, to make the bad into good, to give us eternal life and to make everything peaceful and wonderful. He has come. And his name is Jesus. And he's bigger than Moses, the one who gave us the law. He's better than Moses. He's beyond Moses. Moses isn't the one who fathomed all the mysteries of everything. God gave Moses a message, but Jesus is the reason. He is the reason. And he came to give us grace. He came to give us truth. He came to give us life. He came to give us all of it, it all. See, Jesus himself is the reason. Jesus, this human being, is also the reason for all things. He is the one through whom God made the entire universe. He is the reason. He's not just the reason for the season. Jesus is the reason, period. Jesus is not just the reason for the season. Jesus is the reason, period. Everything that exists because of Jesus. Everything that happens because of Jesus. Everything that is for Jesus. The reason for everything good that is in this world is because Jesus made it good. The reason for everything good that has ever happened in your life is because Jesus made it happen. The reason for everything bad in this world is so that Jesus can destroy it, or fix it, or redeem it, or remake it, or take the pain of it into himself and transform it. The reason for everything bad that has ever happened in this world, everything bad that has ever happened to you personally, is to point you to him. That's why it's there. That's what it's for. That's what it's all about. The reason for everything is to show you that his grace is greater than sin. To show you that his life is better than death. To show you that his light is stronger than darkness. The reason for everything that exists, the reason for everything that has ever happened or will ever happen, the reason for everything in your life and that your life is about is for you to get him. That's what it's all for. That's what it's all for. The reason for your life is not you. The reason for your life is so that you can know him. the reason, the life, the light. He concludes, no one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. No one has ever seen God the Father. He is beyond our vision, beyond anything we could grasp or understand. But in this one, who is with God, and who in nature and quality is God, and who became human, Jesus, we see God in action, so that everything we see in him is the one who created us, who made us, who loved us, and who sent him, Jesus, to redeem you and me. Jesus is the reason, period. But he is the reason for the season too. And to see why, we need to go and catch up with our friend Buck Denver. So some of you kids who have been around, okay, this is the big conclusion of what we've been watching here this month, all right?